The House and the Senate are back in session this week. It's going to be the second to last week until the Independence Day recess. The House is going to continue its consideration of President Obama's trade legislation. They'll also start consideration of the Intelligence Authorization Act, and they've got some Medicare bills that they'll consider towards the end of the week. In the Senate, they'll continue consideration of the Defense Authorization Act. As usual, we're following a number of committee meetings on both sides of the Capitol. The one that's probably most important to credit unions will be the House Appropriations Committee. They're meeting on Wednesday, and they're going to take up the Financial Services and General Government Appropriations Bill. This piece of legislation is important to credit unions for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that it's the bill that funds the Department of Treasury, and it also funds the Community Development Revolving Loan Program at NCUA. So we follow this bill every year. This year, we expect it also to include some policy recommendations for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. So when the Appropriations Committee marks up the Financial Services and General Government Appropriations Bill this week, they'll be looking at the funding levels and various policy riders. There's a report that accompanies the legislation, and that includes the views of the committee on matters that aren't changes in statute. They're not necessarily funding levels, but in general, how does the Appropriations Committee see the world? And what we expect to be included in the report with the Financial Services Appropriations Bill is language that encourages the codification of the Credit Union Advisory Council, that endorses the notion that CUNA has supported for several years, that the CFPB should be a 5-person commission as opposed to a single executive director. We expect to see language that would direct the CFPB to look at its regulations, work with other financial regulators to eliminate unnecessary and duplicative regulation. And then we expect that the report will also make statements on 2 key policy issues at the CFPB related to payday lending and overdraft protection. And in both cases, we expect that the committee report is going to encourage the CFPB to make sure that the rules that they promulgate on these 2 issues protect consumers, but also ensure that they have access to these important financial products. Last week, the House of Representatives took up for the first time the President's Trade Promotion Authority legislation. Now, normally we wouldn't follow this bill very closely. We don't have a position on the legislation, but when the bill came over from the Senate, there was a provision that was included that would have been very troublesome for credit unions. It would have required credit unions to issue 990 tax disclosure forms to credit union members on accounts that earn less than $10 of interest per year. Right now, credit unions have to issue those forms if an account has more than $10 of interest. But there's more. The provision also would have required credit unions to report to the IRS information on all deposit accounts their members hold, even if it's a non-interest account. We opposed the provision a couple weeks ago. We sent a letter to the leadership in both the Senate and the House expressing grave concern for this. And last week, working with the state leagues, with the independent community bankers and their state associations, we worked with the leadership in the House to have that provision removed. Very big victory, because this provision, if it had become law, would have been very problematic for credit unions and consumers alike.